Robert Sterling's hand froze on the chrome door handle of his Bentley, his breath forming vapor clouds in the December air. Through the frost-covered windows of Westfield Academy, he could see something impossible. A homeless black girl in torn clothes teaching advanced calculus to his daughter under the bare oak tree. His 11-year-old Emma wasn't struggling anymore. She was solving equations that had stumped her $300 per hour tutors for months. The security guard's radio crackled to life as he approached the girl, his hand reaching for his weapon. Parents in their luxury SUVs began honking, their faces twisted with disgust and fear as they spotted the intruder on sacred academy grounds. Robert's chest tightened as he watched Emma shield the girl with her small body, remembering another child who had once been chased away from schools just like this one, himself, 30 years ago, before the adoption papers changed everything. "Sir, should we call the police?" his driver asked, but Robert couldn't respond. Who was this girl, and how had she accomplished what thousands of dollars couldn't? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The bitter Michigan wind cut through the manicured grounds of Westfield Academy like a blade, but 12-year-old Keisha Washington barely felt the cold anymore. Her fingers, cracked from months of winter exposure, gripped a stub of pencil as she crouched beside the massive oak tree that had become her sanctuary. The tree's gnarled roots provided just enough shelter from the wind, and its position near the academy's back fence gave her a perfect view into the mathematics classroom. For 3 months now, she had been living in the rusted Buick parked 6 blocks away, watching her mother, Dr. Rosa Washington, slowly disappear into the darkness that had consumed her since Daddy died. Rosa barely spoke anymore, spending her days staring through the cracked windshield with hollow eyes that once guided surgeons through delicate brain operations. The woman who had saved countless lives couldn't save herself from the depression that swallowed her whole after the accident. Keisha had dropped out of school when they lost their house in Detroit. There was no choice. Someone had to take care of Mama, and the foster care system had already failed too many kids she knew. But her mind refused to stop learning. Every morning she would sneak onto the academy grounds and position herself where she could see the blackboard through the window. Advanced calculus, differential equations, quantum mechanics, concepts that danced in her head like old friends. She never meant to meet Emma Sterling. The pale blonde girl had stumbled upon her hiding spot 3 weeks ago, tears streaming down her face after another failed math test. Emma was everything Keisha wasn't. Wealthy, privileged, surrounded by every opportunity money could buy. Yet she struggled with basic algebra that Keisha could solve in her sleep. "I'm so stupid," Emma had whispered that first day, clutching her failed test paper. Keisha had looked up from her own makeshift calculations scrawled on cardboard and said quietly, "You're not stupid. You just haven't found the right way to see it yet." What started as a simple explanation of fractions had blossomed into daily tutoring sessions under the oak tree. Emma would bring extra sandwiches from her lunch, and Keisha would unlock the mathematical mysteries that had tormented her new friend. For the first time since Daddy's funeral, Keisha felt purpose beyond mere survival. Neither girl knew that Robert Sterling had been watching them for days, his morning routine disrupted by the sight of his daughter laughing and learning in ways that thousands of dollars in private tutoring had never achieved. Something about the homeless girl stirred memories he had buried deep, memories of another hungry child who had once pressed his face against classroom windows, dreaming of a world that seemed forever out of reach. The morning Robert Sterling decided to confront the situation, frost covered the academy grounds like a sheet of broken glass. He had arrived 30 minutes early, positioning his Bentley where he could observe the daily ritual that had become an obsession. Emma emerged from the building at exactly 11:47 a.m., her designer backpack slung over one shoulder, moving with a purpose he had never seen before. Then she appeared. The homeless girl who had somehow accomplished what Harvard-educated tutors could not. Keisha Washington moved like a shadow across the manicured lawn, her worn sneakers leaving barely visible prints in the frost. She carried no backpack, just a plastic bag containing what appeared to be scraps of paper and a pencil worn down to nearly nothing. Robert watched as the two girls settled beneath the oak tree, their breath creating small clouds in the frigid air. Within minutes, Emma had pulled out her advanced mathematics textbook, the same one that had reduced her to tears just weeks ago. But now, as Keisha began explaining differential equations, Emma's face lit up with understanding. The derivative of x squared isn't just 2x, Keisha was saying, her voice carrying on the still air. Think of it like this. Imagine you're climbing a hill, and x is how far you've walked. The derivative tells you how steep the hill is at that exact moment. Emma nodded eagerly, scribbling notes with an enthusiasm that made Robert's chest tighten. His daughter, who had been labeled mathematically challenged by every expert they had consulted, was solving calculus problems with the confidence of a graduate student. Robert stepped out of his car, his Italian leather shoes crunching on the frozen ground. Both girls looked up as he approached, but their reactions could not have been more different. Emma's face broke into a genuine smile, the first he had seen from her in months. Keisha, however, scrambled to her feet, clutching her plastic bag like a shield. "Daddy," Emma called out, waving him over. "You have to meet Keisha. She's amazing. She's been helping me understand everything." "Emma?" Robert's voice carried the authority that commanded boardrooms and terrified competitors. "What exactly is going on here?" Keisha took a step backward, her dark eyes darting toward the fence line as if calculating an escape route. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know I'm not supposed to be here. I'll leave." "No!" Emma jumped up, positioning herself between her father and her friend. "She's not doing anything wrong. She's just helping me learn." Robert studied the girl before him, this child who looked like she hadn't had a proper meal in weeks, whose clothes hung loose on her thin frame, whose shoes were held together with duct tape. Yet her eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost otherworldly, and the mathematical equations scattered on the ground around her were more advanced than anything he had encountered in his MIT courses. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone softer than before. "Keisha Washington, sir." She stood straighter, despite her obvious fear. My mama and we're staying nearby. I didn't mean to trespass, I just wanted to learn, and Emma needed help, so I thought." "You thought you could teach my daughter mathematics?" Robert's question wasn't accusatory, but genuinely curious. "She's brilliant, Daddy," Emma interjected. "She knows more about calculus than Mr. Henderson, and he has a PhD from Stanford. Yesterday she taught me about integration techniques that aren't even in our textbook." Robert knelt beside the scattered papers, examining Keisha's work. The calculations were flawless, the methodology elegant, the notation precise. This wasn't the work of a typical 12-year-old. This was the work of someone with an extraordinary mathematical gift. "Where did you learn this?" he asked Keisha. She glanced nervously at Emma before answering. "My daddy taught me before the accident. He was an engineer, said I had his brain for numbers. After that, I just kept learning on my own. Books from the library, watching through classroom windows, listening to online lectures when I could find Wi-Fi." The admission hit Robert like a physical blow. Here was a child with perhaps more natural talent than he had ever possessed, reduced to scavenging for education while his own daughter had every advantage and had been failing. The inequity of it made his stomach turn. "Emma," he said finally, "gather your things. We're going home." Both girls' faces fell, and Keisha began backing away again. "I'm sorry," she repeated. "I won't come back. I promise." But Robert wasn't looking at Keisha anymore. He was staring at his daughter, seeing clearly for the first time the transformation that had taken place. Emma wasn't just learning mathematics. She was happy, engaged, confident in ways she had never been before. The question that would haunt him for the rest of the day was simple. What kind of man would destroy that? The drive home from Westfield Academy passed in tense silence, Emma staring out the window while Robert's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. The image of Keisha Washington backing away in fear replayed in his mind like a broken record, each repetition making his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Guilt? Recognition? Something deeper and more unsettling? "You can't stop me from seeing her," Emma said suddenly, her voice carrying a defiance Robert had never heard before. "She's my friend." "Emma, you don't understand the situation," Robert replied, navigating through the tree-lined streets of their exclusive Birmingham neighborhood. "That girl is homeless. She's trespassing on school property. There are liability issues, safety concerns." "Safety concerns?" Emma whirled around in her seat, her blue eyes blazing. "Keisha is the safest person I know. She's never hurt anyone. She just wants to learn, and she's helping me learn too." "Why is that so wrong?" Robert pulled into their circular driveway, the house looming before them like a monument to his success. 4 stories of limestone and glass, immaculate gardens, a 3-car garage that cost more than most people made in a year. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built to prove he belonged in this world. "It's complicated," he said finally. "No, it's not." Emma unbuckled her seatbelt but didn't get out of the car. "You don't want me talking to her because she's black and poor. That's it, isn't it?" The accusation hit Robert like a slap. "Emma Sterling, that is not—" "Then what is it, Dad? Because 3 weeks ago, you were ready to send me to summer school because I was failing calculus. Now I'm getting A's, and you want to take that away because you don't like where my help is coming from?" Robert's phone buzzed with a text from his private investigator, the same man he had hired that morning to look into Keisha Washington's background. The message was brief but troubling. Family situation complex. Mother was prominent surgeon. Tragic circumstances. Will send full report tonight. That evening, Robert sat in his mahogany-paneled study, reading the investigative report that would change everything. Dr. Rosa Washington had been one of Detroit's most promising neurosurgeons before her world collapsed 3 years ago. Her husband, Marcus Washington, had died in an industrial accident at one of Robert's subsidiary companies, a manufacturing plant that had been cited for safety violations just months before the tragedy. The photographs in the report showed a different woman entirely from the hollow-eyed figure Robert had glimpsed through car windows. Dr. Rosa Washington had been beautiful, confident, successful. She had saved lives, published medical papers, raised a brilliant daughter while building a career that most people only dreamed of achieving. Then came the insurance battles, the lawsuit that dragged on for 2 years, the mounting medical bills from Marcus's prolonged hospitalization before his death. The company's legal team, Robert's legal team, had fought the family's wrongful death claim with ruthless efficiency. They had found technicalities, questioned Marcus's competence, delayed proceedings until the family's resources were exhausted. Dr. Rosa Washington had sold their home to pay for lawyers, then their cars, then her medical practice to cover Marcus's hospital bills. When the settlement finally came through, it was a fraction of what the family deserved, and most of it went to creditors. Within 6 months, one of Detroit's most respected surgeons was living in her car with her daughter. Robert's hands shook as he read the final page of the report. Keisha Washington wasn't just any homeless child. She was the daughter of a woman his company had systematically destroyed. The brilliant girl who had been teaching his daughter was surviving on the streets because of decisions he had made, policies he had approved, lawyers he had hired. The irony was suffocating. His company's negligence had killed Marcus Washington, created the circumstances that drove Rosa and Keisha into homelessness, and now that same homeless child was giving his daughter the education that millions of dollars couldn't buy. Robert reached for his phone, then stopped. What could he possibly say? How do you apologize for destroying someone's life? How do you explain that you never meant for it to happen, that the legal strategies were just business decisions, that you never thought about the human cost? A knock on the study door interrupted his spiral of guilt. "Come in." Emma entered, still wearing her school uniform, her usually perfect hair disheveled. "Mom told me you were researching Keisha's family." "Emma, is it true that one of your companies killed her father?" Robert's blood ran cold. "Where did you hear that?" "I did my own research." Emma held up her laptop. "Marcus Washington died at Sterling Industries' Detroit manufacturing plant 3 years ago. The same Marcus Washington who was married to Dr. Rosa Washington. The same Dr. Rosa Washington who is now living in a car with her daughter because your lawyers fought their wrongful death claim." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to voice. "Emma, business decisions aren't always—" "Don't." Emma's voice was ice cold. "Don't you dare try to justify this. You destroyed her family and now you want to punish her for surviving it." Robert stood up slowly, feeling every one of his 45 years. "The legal team made those decisions. I wasn't directly involved in— You signed off on it." Emma pulled out a printed email chain she had somehow accessed. "Right here. You approved the strategy to delay proceedings and question Marcus Washington's competence. You called it Standard Operating Procedure for Limiting Liability." The proof was there in black and white, his electronic signature on documents that had prolonged the Washington family's suffering. Robert had signed dozens of similar authorizations over the years, never thinking about the people behind the case numbers, the families whose lives hung in the balance while lawyers played chess with their futures. "Keisha doesn't know, does she?" Emma asked quietly. "She has no idea that the man whose daughter she's been tutoring is responsible for her father's death and her family's homelessness." Robert shook his head, unable to trust his voice. "What are you going to do about it?" Emma demanded. "I don't know," Robert admitted, the words feeling like confession. "I honestly don't know." Emma stared at her father for a long moment, seeing him clearly, perhaps for the first time in her life. "Well, I do," she said finally. "I'm going to keep learning from her, and I'm going to help her however I can, because that's what decent people do when they've been given everything and someone else has lost it all." She turned toward the door, then paused. "And Dad, if you try to stop me from seeing Keisha, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly how the Sterling family fortune was built, on the graves of people like Marcus Washington." The door closed with a soft click, leaving Robert alone with the weight of his choices and the growing realization that his daughter had become a better person than he was. The next 3 weeks passed in a delicate dance of secrets and revelations. Robert found himself driving past the abandoned lot where the rusted Buick sat each morning, watching as Keisha helped her mother from the car and settled her in a patch of sunlight before walking the 6 blocks to Westfield Academy. Dr. Rosa Washington moved like a ghost, her once confident stride reduced to shuffling steps, her brilliant mind trapped behind eyes that saw only loss. Robert had instructed his security team to allow Keisha onto the academy grounds, a decision that had raised eyebrows throughout the administration. Victoria Blackwood, the stern headmistress, had requested a meeting 3 times, each one rebuffed with vague excuses about monitoring the situation. But Robert knew he was buying time, wrestling with a moral equation that had no clean solution. Meanwhile, Emma's transformation continued to astound her teachers. Her calculus grades had soared from failing to the top of her class. More importantly, she carried herself with a confidence that years of expensive tutoring had never provided. She spoke up in class, volunteered for advanced mathematics competitions, and had even started helping other struggling students during lunch periods. "It's remarkable," Dr. Patricia Henley, the mathematics department head, told Robert during a parent-teacher conference. Emma has not only mastered the current curriculum but is working at a level typically seen in university freshmen. Whatever you've done differently, it's working. What he had done differently was allow his daughter to be taught by a homeless girl whose family he had destroyed. The irony burned in his chest like acid every time someone praised Emma's progress. During those same 3 weeks, Robert had been conducting his own investigation into the Washington family's current circumstances. Dr. Rosa Washington had been hospitalized twice in the past 6 months for what appeared to be severe depression and malnutrition. Keisha had somehow managed to keep them fed and sheltered, taking on odd jobs around the neighborhood, cleaning windows, running errands, tutoring younger children for whatever coins their parents could spare. The girl was carrying burdens that would crush most adults, yet she showed up every day to teach Emma with patience and enthusiasm that shamed Robert's memories of his own privileged education. She never asked for anything beyond the sandwiches Emma shared, never complained about her circumstances, never showed the bitterness that would have been entirely justified. One afternoon, Robert arrived at the academy early and watched from his car as Emma and Keisha worked together under the oak tree. They had moved beyond mathematics now. Keisha was helping Emma with her college preparatory essays, guiding her through complex reasoning that would impress admissions committees at the nation's top universities. "Why do you want to study engineering?" Keisha asked, her breath visible in the cold air. "Because I want to build things that help people," Emma replied. "Bridges that connect communities, buildings that house families, systems that make life better." "That's beautiful," Keisha said softly. "Your essay should start with that feeling, not with statistics about job prospects." Robert found himself leaning forward, struck by the wisdom in this 12-year-old's words. Here was a child who had lost everything, offering guidance about building a meaningful life to a girl who had been given everything. His phone buzzed with a message from his assistant. "Margaret requests dinner meeting tonight. Says it's urgent regarding Emma's association with the homeless girl." Robert's wife had been increasingly vocal about her concerns over their daughter's friendship. Margaret Sterling had built her identity around social position and appearances, and the whispers at country club luncheons were growing louder. Several prominent families had made subtle inquiries about whether the Sterlings were having difficulties that required their daughter to seek tutoring from such an unusual source. That evening's dinner conversation exploded into the confrontation Robert had been dreading. "This has gone far enough," Margaret announced as soon as the housekeeping staff had left them alone in the dining room. "Do you have any idea what people are saying about us? About Emma?" "What people are saying doesn't matter," Robert replied, cutting into his steak with more force than necessary. "It matters to me," Margaret shot back. "The Hendersons asked me at the charity gala whether we were experiencing financial difficulties that prevented us from hiring proper tutors. The Blackwoods wondered aloud if Emma had special needs that required unconventional teaching methods." Emma, who had been pushing food around her plate in silence, suddenly looked up. "Maybe if you cared more about my actual education and less about what your friends think, you'd realize that Keisha has given me something no amount of money could buy." "And what's that?" Margaret's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Street wisdom?" "Understanding," Emma replied quietly. "She's taught me that intelligence isn't about how much your parents spend on tutors. It's about curiosity, persistence, and caring enough about learning to do it even when nobody's watching." Margaret turned to Robert with an expression of barely controlled fury. "Are you going to allow our daughter to romanticize poverty like this? This girl is manipulating Emma, taking advantage of her kindness." "How?" Emma demanded. "By refusing to take money when I offered it, by sharing her own food with me when she barely has enough, by staying late to make sure I understand concepts that my expensive tutors couldn't explain." Robert set down his fork, the weight of the conversation settling on his shoulders like a shroud. "Margaret, I think you need to understand something about Keisha Washington and her family." Over the next 20 minutes, he told them both about Marcus Washington's death, Dr. Rosa Washington's fall from prominence, and the role his company had played in their destruction. Margaret's face went through several transformations: shock, disbelief, and finally, a calculating expression that Robert recognized from her business negotiations. "All the more reason to end this association immediately," she said when he finished. "If this ever becomes public knowledge, the lawsuits alone could destroy everything we've built." "And Emma?" She turned to her daughter with something approaching panic. "You cannot let anyone know about this connection. Do you understand the implications?" Emma stared at her parents for a long moment, her face cycling through emotions too complex for her 11 years. "So let me make sure I understand," she said slowly. "Dad's company killed Keisha's father and destroyed her family. She's been living in a car and taking care of her sick mother because of our lawyers. And now, instead of feeling grateful that she's been kind enough to help me despite what we did to her, you want me to pretend she doesn't exist to protect our reputation?" "Emma, it's not that simple," Robert began. "Yes, it is," Emma interrupted, standing up from the table. "It's exactly that simple. We hurt them, and they're still being good to us. We have everything, and they have nothing, but somehow they're the ones teaching us about decency." She walked toward the dining room entrance, then turned back. "I'm going to keep learning from Keisha, and I'm going to help her family however I can, because that's what you taught me to do, even if you don't remember it anymore." Margaret waited until Emma's footsteps faded up the staircase before speaking. "This is a disaster, Robert. If the connection between our company and that family becomes public knowledge, it won't matter how brilliant their daughter is. We'll be destroyed in the court of public opinion." Robert found himself thinking about Keisha's patient explanations of calculus concepts, her gentle corrections when Emma made mistakes, her refusal to accept anything beyond friendship in return for hours of dedicated teaching. "Maybe we deserve to be." "What did you say?" "Maybe we deserve whatever consequences come from this," Robert repeated, the words feeling strange in his mouth. "We destroyed their family through negligence and legal maneuvering. Their daughter is teaching our daughter despite having every reason to hate us. Maybe the right thing to do isn't to protect ourselves from exposure. Maybe it's to make things right." Margaret's laugh was bitter and sharp. "Make things right. Robert, you can't resurrect the dead or undo 3 years of homelessness. But you can protect your living family from the consequences of corporate decisions that happened before Emma was even old enough to understand them." That night, Robert stood at his bedroom window overlooking the perfectly manicured grounds of their estate. Somewhere across the city, Keisha Washington was probably helping her mother settle into the back seat of a broken-down car, making sure she was warm enough for another night of uncertainty. Tomorrow, that same girl would walk 6 blocks to teach his daughter lessons that went far beyond mathematics. The question that kept him awake wasn't whether he could afford to make amends. With his resources, he could easily provide housing, medical care, and educational opportunities for the Washington family. The question was whether he could afford not to, both morally and practically. Emma had made it clear that she would continue the relationship regardless of his approval, and her threat to expose the family's connection to Marcus Washington's death wasn't idle. His daughter had inherited his strategic mind along with his stubborn streak. But more than that, Robert was beginning to realize that Keisha Washington had given his family something invaluable. She had shown them what character looked like under pressure, what generosity meant when you had nothing left to give, what education could accomplish when driven by genuine curiosity rather than social expectation. The decision he made in the coming days wouldn't just determine the Washington family's future. It would determine what kind of man he wanted to be and what kind of legacy he wanted to leave for his daughter. Outside, snow began to fall on the empty grounds, each flake catching the light from the house's countless windows. Robert thought about another little girl somewhere across the city, probably watching the same snow through a cracked windshield and calculating how much colder it would make their car tonight. The time for calculation was ending. Soon he would have to choose between preservation and redemption, between protecting what he had built and becoming the person his daughter still believed he could be. The crisis began on a Tuesday morning in late January, when Dr. Rosa Washington collapsed in the parking lot of a grocery store where Keisha had been asking for day-old bread. The paramedics found her unconscious, her pulse weak and irregular, her skin cold despite the mild winter weather. Keisha rode in the ambulance, holding her mother's lifeless hand and answering questions she had hoped never to face. "Does your mother have any medical insurance?" the EMT asked as they raced toward Detroit General Hospital. "No, sir," Keisha whispered, her voice barely audible over the sirens. "Any family we can contact?" Keisha shook her head, thinking of the relatives who had stopped returning their calls years ago, embarrassed by the family's fall from grace. "Just me." At the hospital, the emergency room physician delivered the news that Keisha had been dreading for months. "Dr. Rosa Washington was suffering from severe cardiac arrhythmia brought on by prolonged malnutrition and untreated depression. Her heart was failing, and without immediate intervention, she had perhaps 72 hours to live. She needs emergency surgery," Dr. Jennifer Martinez explained, her voice gentle but urgent. "We can stabilize her temporarily, but she requires a cardiac catheterization procedure and possibly a pacemaker implantation. The total cost would be approximately $80,000. Keisha stared at the linoleum floor, calculating numbers that added up to impossibility. $80,000 might as well have been $80 million. She had $17 in her pocket, money earned from tutoring neighborhood children and collecting recycling cans. "What happens if we can't pay?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "We'll do everything we can to keep her comfortable," Dr. Martinez said carefully. "Detroit General has payment plans, charity care programs, but without insurance or a substantial down payment." The sentence hung unfinished in the sterile air. Keisha understood the implication. They would let her mother die because she couldn't afford to save her. While Rosa underwent emergency stabilization procedures, Keisha sat in the waiting room and did something she had never done before. She called Emma Sterling. The phone number was written on a scrap of paper Emma had given her weeks ago. "For emergencies only." This qualified. Emma answered on the second ring. "Keisha? What's wrong? You sound terrible." Through tears she couldn't control, Keisha explained about her mother's collapse, the diagnosis, the impossible financial situation. Emma listened in shocked silence, occasionally asking questions that revealed her own sheltered understanding of poverty and medical crises. "Can't the hospital just do the surgery and send you a bill later?" Emma asked. "It doesn't work like that when you're homeless," Keisha replied. "They need money up front, or at least proof that someone can pay. We don't have either." "What about government assistance? Medicare? Medicaid?" "My mama lost her medical license when she got sick. We don't qualify for most programs because we don't have a permanent address, and even if we did, the paperwork takes months." Emma was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried a determination that reminded Keisha of Robert Sterling. "I'm coming to the hospital. Don't make any decisions until I get there." "Emma, no. Your parents. I don't care what my parents think. You helped me when I needed it. Now it's my turn." 2 hours later, Emma arrived at Detroit General Hospital accompanied by her father. Robert Sterling walked through the emergency department like he owned it, his expensive suit and commanding presence parting the crowd of patients and families waiting for care. Keisha had never seen him outside the controlled environment of Westfield Academy, and his presence here felt surreal. "Where is she?" Robert asked without preamble. Keisha led them to the cardiac unit, where Rosa lay connected to monitors and IVs, her face peaceful in sedated sleep. Robert stared at the woman in the hospital bed for a long time, his expression unreadable. This was Dr. Rosa Washington, the neurosurgeon whose husband his company had killed, whose family his lawyers had systematically destroyed. "What do the doctors say?" he asked quietly. Keisha repeated Dr. Martinez's explanation, watching Robert's face for any sign of what he might be thinking. When she finished describing the cost and their inability to pay, Robert was silent for several minutes. "Mr. Sterling," Keisha said finally, her voice small and careful, "I know Emma is your daughter, and I know you probably don't want her associated with people like us. But she's been a good friend to me, and I just wanted her to know what was happening. I didn't call because I expected anything from you." Robert looked at her then, really looked at her, seeing not just the brilliant child who had been teaching his daughter, but the 12-year-old girl who was about to lose her mother to a system that valued money over life. "Keisha," he said slowly, "what do you know about your father's death?" The question caught her off guard. "He died in an accident at work 3 years ago. There was a lawsuit, but the lawyer said the company wasn't responsible." "Why?" Robert's jaw tightened. Emma grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with warning, but he gently pulled away. "The company where your father worked, Sterling Industries Manufacturing, that's my company. I own it." Keisha blinked, processing the information. "Your company?" "My lawyers fought your family's wrongful death claim. They found ways to minimize our liability, to delay proceedings until your resources were exhausted. The settlement you received was a fraction of what your family deserved." The color drained from Keisha's face as the implications hit her. Your company killed my daddy?" "Yes," Robert said simply, "through negligence and cost-cutting that I approved. And then my legal team made sure your family couldn't hold us properly accountable." Emma stepped between them, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Dad, not here. Not now." But Keisha was staring at Robert with an expression that broke his heart. Not hatred or rage, but a deep sadness that seemed too mature for her years. "Is that why you don't want Emma to be my friend? Because you feel guilty?" "No," Robert said firmly. "I don't want to lose Emma's friendship with you. I want to make things right." "You can't bring my daddy back." "No, I can't. But I can save your mother, Doctor." Martinez appeared at that moment, having been summoned by nurses who recognized Robert Sterling's name and understood its implications for hospital donations. "Mr. Sterling, I understand you're inquiring about Mrs. Washington's case." "Dr. Martinez, isn't it?" Robert extended his hand. "I want you to proceed with whatever surgery or treatment Mrs. Washington requires. All costs will be covered by the Sterling Foundation, no questions asked. I also want her transferred to the best cardiac unit in the state. Henry Ford Hospital has an excellent program, I believe." Dr. Martinez looked stunned. "Mr. Sterling, that's incredibly generous, but the transfer alone would cost—" "Dr. Martinez," Robert interrupted, "price is not a factor. Mrs. Washington receives whatever care she needs, wherever she needs it, for as long as she needs it. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, sir. I'll make the arrangements immediately. As doctor." Martinez hurried away to coordinate the transfer. Keisha remained frozen beside her mother's bed. The emotional whiplash was overwhelming, learning that the man offering to save her mother was the same man whose company had killed her father and destroyed their family. "Why?" she asked Robert. "Why are you doing this?" Robert looked at his daughter, then back at Keisha. "Because Emma taught me something these past few weeks. She showed me what you've been giving her, not just mathematical knowledge, but integrity, kindness, resilience. You've been teaching my daughter how to be a better person, despite having every reason to hate our family." "I don't hate you," Keisha said quietly. "Maybe you should." Daddy always said that hate was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It hurts you more than them. The wisdom in those words, spoken by a 12-year-old who had lost everything, hit Robert like a physical blow. Here was a child who could teach his Harvard MBA something about leadership, his expensive therapists, something about healing, his social circle, something about grace under pressure. Emma had been right all along. Keisha Washington wasn't just a brilliant teacher. She was a better human being than most of the adults in Robert's world, despite having been given far less reason to trust in human goodness. As the medical team prepared Rosa for transfer to Henry Ford Hospital, Robert made a decision that would change all their lives. He pulled out his phone and called his attorney. "David, I need you to draft some papers immediately. I want to establish a full trust fund for Keisha Washington. Education expenses through graduate school, housing allowance, medical coverage for her and her mother, living expenses until she reaches adulthood. Also, prepare custody documents in case her mother doesn't recover fully. I want legal guardianship options in place." Emma grabbed his arm, her eyes bright with tears. "Dad, are you serious?" "I'm serious." He looked at Keisha, who was staring at him in shock. "If you'll let me, I'd like to make sure you never have to worry about having a roof over your head or money for school again. It won't bring your father back, and it doesn't erase what my company did to your family. But it's a start." Keisha was crying now, overwhelmed by the sudden shift from despair to hope. "I don't understand. Why would you do all this for us?" Robert knelt beside her chair, meeting her eyes at her level. "Because you saved my daughter, Keisha. Not just her grades. You saved who she is. You taught her mathematics, but more than that, you taught her compassion, determination, and humility. You gave her something I couldn't buy with all my money. You gave her character." The ambulance arrived to transport Rosa to Henry Ford Hospital, and as they prepared to leave Detroit General, Robert realized he was about to cross a line he could never uncross. Once word got out about his support for the Washington family, the connection to Marcus Washington's death would eventually surface. His company's role in their tragedy would become public knowledge. But as he watched Keisha hold her mother's hand during the transfer, whispering encouragement to the unconscious woman who had sacrificed everything for her daughter's future, Robert understood that some things were more important than protecting his reputation. Some debts could only be paid with truth, and some redemptions could only come through surrender. The tragedy struck on the 4th day of Rosa's recovery at Henry Ford Hospital. She had undergone successful cardiac surgery, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic about her prognosis. Keisha had been sleeping in the family waiting room, surviving on hospital cafeteria sandwiches and Emma's daily visits. For the first time in months, hope seemed like more than a cruel illusion. Then Victoria Blackwood arrived with a team of social workers and 2 Detroit police officers. "Miss Washington," Victoria announced as she swept into the cardiac unit with the authority of someone accustomed to commanding respect. "I'm here on behalf of Westfield Academy and the Michigan Department of Child Protective Services." Keisha looked up from her mother's bedside, where she had been reading aloud from a mathematics textbook Emma had brought her. Rosa was awake but still weak, her eyes following the conversation with growing alarm. "I don't understand," Keisha said, instinctively moving closer to her mother's bed. Victoria's smile was sharp and cold. "There have been concerns raised about your living situation and your unauthorized presence on academy grounds. These officers are here to escort you to a temporary foster placement while we sort out your custody arrangements." "No," Rosa whispered, trying to sit up despite the IV lines and monitor cables. "She stays with me." "Mrs. Washington," one of the social workers said gently, "you're in no condition to provide adequate care for a child. Miss Washington has been living without proper supervision, attending school irregularly and engaging in inappropriate relationships with students from prominent families. Inappropriate relationships? Keisha's voice cracked with disbelief. Emma is my friend. I've been helping her with her studies. You've been trespassing on private property and taking advantage of a vulnerable child, Victoria corrected. Miss Sterling's generosity in covering your mother's medical expenses doesn't change the fact that you're an unaccompanied minor in need of state intervention. Officer Patricia Johnson, a woman whose own children attended Detroit public schools, looked uncomfortable with the proceedings. Ma'am, the girl appears to be well cared for, and the mother is recovering. Maybe we could explore family placement options before removing her from the hospital? Officer Johnson. Victoria's tone carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to having her wishes become policy. I've been in education for 20 years. This child has been living in a car, attending school sporadically, and forming unhealthy attachments to families far above her social station. She needs structure, discipline, and realistic expectations about her future. What Victoria didn't say, but what hung in the air like poison gas, was the real reason for her intervention. Word of Robert Sterling's financial support for the Washington family had spread through Birmingham's social circles like wildfire. Questions were being asked about why the wealthy tech executive would suddenly take such interest in a homeless family. The whispers were growing louder, and several prominent families had privately expressed concern about undesirable elements being welcomed into their exclusive educational environment. Victoria had built her career on maintaining Westfield Academy's reputation as a sanctuary for the city's elite. She had spent years carefully curating the student body, ensuring that diversity existed only in acceptable, controllable quantities. A brilliant homeless girl who could outperform their expensively tutored children threatened the entire ecosystem of privilege and exclusivity that made parents willing to pay $60,000 annually in tuition. Mrs. Blackwood, Rosa's voice was stronger now, fueled by maternal desperation. My daughter is not a charity case. She's brilliant, responsible, and has been taking better care of me than most adults could manage. She doesn't need your rescue. What she needs, Victoria replied coldly, is to understand her place in the world. She's been filling this child's head with unrealistic dreams about attending university, pursuing advanced mathematics, mixing with children whose families have built this community's institutions. It's cruel to encourage expectations that can only lead to disappointment. The mask was slipping now, revealing the ugly truth beneath Victoria's professional concern. This wasn't about child welfare or proper supervision. This was about maintaining social boundaries, keeping the poor in their designated spaces, ensuring that privilege remained the exclusive province of those who could afford it. Keisha understood immediately. She had seen this same expression on the faces of security guards who chased her from library steps, store managers who accused her of shoplifting before she had touched anything, teachers who assumed she was trouble before she had spoken a word. Victoria Blackwood saw a smart black girl from the streets and recognized her as a threat to the natural order of things. I won't go, Keisha said quietly, but with steel in her voice that reminded everyone in the room that she had survived 3 years of homelessness through sheer determination. My mama needs me, and I haven't done anything wrong. Keisha, Officer Johnson said gently, I understand you want to stay with your mother, but if Child Protective Services has determined what? Emma Sterling's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She stood in the doorway with her father, both of them having arrived for their daily visit to find the room full of officials intent on destroying the family they had just begun to help rebuild. Robert Sterling took in the scene with the strategic mind that had built his business empire. Social workers, police officers, and the Westfield Academy headmistress all gathered around a hospital bed where a recovering woman watched strangers prepare to take her child away. The setup was too convenient, too coordinated to be coincidental. "Victoria," Robert said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that made board members nervous, "what exactly is happening here?" "Robert, thank goodness you're here," Victoria replied, her tone shifting to professional warmth. "We're simply addressing some concerns about Miss Washington's living situation. With her mother's medical issues and their lack of stable housing, we felt it would be best to place Keisha in a proper foster home until more permanent arrangements can be made." "More permanent arrangements?" Emma stepped forward, her young face flushed with anger. "You mean keeping her away from our family because you're worried about what people will think?" "Emma, dear, this isn't about—" "Yes, it is," Emma interrupted, her voice rising. "It's about the same thing it's always been about. You don't want poor kids mixing with rich kids because it makes the parents uncomfortable. You don't want anyone to see how smart Keisha is because it makes your expensive tutors look incompetent." Robert placed a calming hand on his daughter's shoulder, but his eyes never left Victoria's face. "Officer Johnson, on what grounds is Child Protective Services intervening in this case?" Officer Johnson looked at her paperwork, then at the social worker, who seemed less certain than she had moments earlier. "Well, sir, there were reports of an unaccompanied minor living in unsafe conditions, attending school irregularly." "Keisha hasn't been attending school at all," Robert corrected. "She's been tutoring my daughter on private academy grounds with my full knowledge and permission. As for unsafe conditions, I've already arranged permanent housing for the Washington family, along with comprehensive medical coverage and educational support." The social worker frowned. "Mr. Sterling, while your generosity is admirable, it doesn't address the underlying issues of supervision and—" "What underlying issues?" Rosa's voice was growing stronger, her medical training reasserting itself as she recognized a bureaucratic power play disguised as concern. "My daughter has been exemplary in her care for me. She's never been in trouble with the law, never missed a day of helping with my medical needs, never shown anything but maturity and responsibility." Victoria's composure began to crack as she realized her carefully orchestrated intervention was falling apart. "The point is that this arrangement is highly irregular. A homeless child forming such an intense attachment to a family of this prominence raises questions about motivations and appropriateness." "What motivations?" Robert's voice had dropped to the tone that terrified his competitors. "A brilliant child helping my daughter succeed academically while asking for nothing in return. A sick woman trying to survive while maintaining her dignity. What exactly do you find inappropriate about kindness between human beings? Robert, you know I have the utmost respect for your family, but surely you can see that this situation has the potential for complications." The girl's background, her family's circumstances, the potential for dependency or exploitation. "Exploitation?" Emma's voice was incredulous. "Keisha has been exploited her entire life by people who should have helped her. She's been ignored by school systems, dismissed by social services, and treated like garbage by people who couldn't solve a fraction if their lives depended on it. The only person who hasn't exploited her is my dad. And now you want to punish her for finally finding someone decent?" The room fell silent except for the steady beep of Rosa's heart monitor. Victoria realized that her intervention had not only failed, but had exposed her true motivations to people with the power to destroy her career. Robert Sterling was not just wealthy. He was influential in ways that could make her professional life very uncomfortable. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "we should table this discussion until Mrs. Washington has recovered more fully. I'm sure we can work out an arrangement that serves everyone's best interests." But the damage was done. In trying to separate Keisha from the Sterling family, Victoria had only succeeded in revealing the ugly prejudices that lurked beneath the polished surface of Birmingham's educational elite. and she had made an enemy of the one man in the city who had both the resources and the motivation to ensure that her version of appropriate relationships never again determined a child's future. As the officials filed out of the hospital room, Robert realized that the real battle was just beginning. Victoria Blackwood had declared war on the idea that merit could transcend social class, that intelligence could bridge racial divides, that love could overcome the boundaries of privilege. She had chosen the wrong family to fight. The revelation came 3 days later through an anonymous email sent to every major news outlet in Detroit. Someone had leaked the connection between Marcus Washington's death and Robert Sterling's company, along with detailed financial records showing the systematic legal strategy used to minimize the wrongful death settlement. The story exploded across local media with a ferocity that caught even Robert's experienced crisis management team off guard. Sterling Industries' heir helps family. His company destroyed, read the Detroit Free Press headline. Billionaire's guilt money or genuine redemption? Asked the Detroit News. Social media erupted with competing narratives, some praising Robert's efforts to make amends, others condemning what they saw as too little, too late from a wealthy man trying to buy his way out of moral responsibility. Robert sat in his office at Sterling Industries headquarters, watching the news coverage with his legal team and public relations advisors. The damage to his company's reputation was immediate and severe. Stock prices had dropped 12% in 2 days. 3 major clients had called emergency meetings to discuss their contracts. His board of directors was demanding answers. "We need to get ahead of this narrative," urged Patricia Walsh, his head of communications, a carefully crafted statement expressing regret while emphasizing the current charitable actions. Maybe a scholarship fund announcement to show ongoing commitment to the community. "Absolutely not," Robert said firmly. "No damage control, no spin, no deflection." The room fell silent. David Morrison, his chief legal counsel, leaned forward with concern. "Robert, I understand your desire for transparency, but we have shareholders to consider, employees whose jobs depend on this company's reputation, clients who need assurance that we're still a stable business partner. And we have a dead man's family who spent 3 years homeless because of decisions I approved," Robert replied. "David, I want you to conduct a comprehensive review of every wrongful death case we've handled in the past 10 years, every settlement we fought, every delay tactic we used, every family we exhausted into accepting inadequate compensation." Patricia looked horrified. "That kind of review could expose us to dozens of additional lawsuits. The financial liability alone could bankrupt us," Robert finished. "I understand. Do it anyway." While his corporate team scrambled to understand their CEO's apparent self-destructive impulses, Robert was dealing with a more immediate crisis at home. Margaret had been fielding phone calls from reporters, neighbors, and social acquaintances for 2 days. Their country club membership was under review. Emma's classmates' parents were whispering about whether the Sterling family was experiencing some kind of mental health crisis. "This has to stop," Margaret announced over dinner, her voice tight with controlled fury. "I've been humiliated at every social function I've attended this week. People are asking if we're having financial problems, if you're having a breakdown, if Emma is involved with some kind of cult." "A cult?" Emma looked up from her untouched meal. "Is that what they're calling friendship now? Don't be glib with me, young lady. Your father's midlife crisis is destroying everything our family has worked to build." Robert set down his fork and looked at his wife of 15 years. Margaret had been beautiful when they married, ambitious and intelligent in ways that complemented his own drive for success. But somewhere along the way, their shared ambition had calcified into something harder and less forgiving. The woman who had once talked about using their wealth to make a difference had become someone who measured worth primarily through social positioning and competitive acquisition. "Margaret, when we got married, what did you say you wanted our life to represent?" She blinked, caught off guard by the question. "What does that have to do with anything?" "You said you wanted to build something meaningful. You said money without purpose was just keeping score in a game that didn't matter. What happened to that woman?" "That woman didn't have a daughter to protect," Margaret shot back. "That woman didn't understand how quickly everything you've worked for can be destroyed by association with the wrong people." Emma stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "The wrong people? You mean Keisha? The girl who's smarter than every kid in my class, who's been taking care of her sick mother since she was 9 years old, who taught me more about mathematics and life than every expensive tutor you've ever hired?" "Emma, you're too young to understand the complexities. I understand that Keisha's father died because our company cut corners on safety equipment. I understand that our lawyers spent 2 years making sure his family got as little money as possible. I understand that while we were living in this mansion, they were sleeping in a car because of what we did to them. And I understand that despite all of that, Keisha never asked us for anything except the chance to learn and to help me learn too." Margaret's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "That girl is manipulating you, Emma. She's using your guilt and your father's guilt to gain access to our family, our resources, our social circle." "People like that always have an angle." "People like what, Mom?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Margaret realized she had stepped to the edge of saying something that would permanently damage her relationship with her daughter, but her fear and social conditioning were stronger than her discretion. "People who come from nothing and see an opportunity to take advantage of those who have something," she said finally. Emma stared at her mother with an expression of dawning horror. "You mean black people, poor people? You mean people who weren't born rich and white like us?" "Emma, that's not—" "Yes, it is exactly what you mean." Emma's voice was cold with the kind of moral clarity that only children possess before the world teaches them to compromise their principles. "You think Keisha is trying to trick us because you can't imagine that someone might just be genuinely good. You think she has an angle because you've never had to be kind without expecting something in return." Robert watched the confrontation between his wife and daughter with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. Emma had become the person he had once hoped to be. Someone who measured worth by character rather than bank account. Someone who understood that privilege carried responsibility rather than just opportunities for accumulation. "Your mother is scared," he said quietly. "She's watching everything she thought was important crumble, and she doesn't know who we'll be if we're not the people who have the biggest house, the most expensive cars, the most exclusive social connections." Margaret turned on him with fury. "Don't you dare psychoanalyze me, Robert. I'm scared because you're destroying our family for people who will never truly be grateful, who will always see us as the enemy no matter what we do for them. You think paying for one woman's medical bills erases the fact that your company killed her husband? You think setting up a trust fund for their daughter makes you some kind of hero?" "No," Robert replied. "I think it makes me slightly less of a villain." The phone rang before Margaret could respond. Emma answered, recognizing Keisha's voice immediately. "Emma, I need to tell you something," Keisha said, her words coming fast with anxiety. "I saw the news stories about your dad and my daddy's accident. I know people are saying terrible things about your family because of us." Emma took the phone into the living room, away from her parents' argument. "Keisha, none of that matters. You and your mom didn't do anything wrong." "But I did," Keisha said, her voice breaking. "I should have told you who I was when we first met. I should have told you that your dad's company killed my daddy. I let you be my friend without knowing the truth, and now everyone thinks I was using you. Were you using me?" The question was direct, honest, without accusation. Keisha was quiet for a long moment. "No," she said finally. I was just happy to have a friend. I was just happy to teach someone who wanted to learn. I didn't know who your daddy was when we met, and when I found out, I didn't know what to do with that information. I just knew I didn't want to lose the only real friend I'd ever had." Emma closed her eyes, feeling the weight of adult complexity settling on her 11-year-old shoulders. "Keisha, do you blame us for what happened to your dad?" Another long pause. "I blame the system that values profit more than safety. I blame the lawyers who care more about winning than justice. I blame the world that makes it easier to destroy a family than to admit a mistake. But I don't blame you, Emma. And I don't even blame your daddy anymore because I've seen who he's choosing to be now." "Then that's all that matters," Emma said firmly. "Everyone else can think whatever they want to think." But even as she spoke those brave words, Emma understood that the real test was just beginning. The news coverage was intensifying, the social pressure mounting, the financial costs accumulating. Soon, her father would face a choice that would define not just their family's future, but the kind of man he would be remembered as being. Through the living room window, Emma could see the Sterling Industries building in the distance, its glass facade reflecting the setting sun like a mirror. Somewhere in that building, her father was making decisions that would ripple through dozens of lives, hundreds of employees, thousands of shareholders. But in her heart, Emma knew the most important decision wasn't being made in a boardroom. It was being made in the quiet moments when her father looked at Keisha Washington and saw not a liability or a threat or a symbol, but simply a brilliant child who deserved the same chances he had been given. The question was whether he would have the courage to act on that recognition, even when it cost him everything he had spent his adult life building. The final revelation came not through a dramatic confrontation or a tearful confession, but through a manila envelope delivered to Robert Sterling's office by a woman he hadn't seen in 25 years. Victoria Blackwood stood in his executive suite, her usual commanding presence replaced by something that looked almost like vulnerability. "I need to show you something," she said without preamble, placing a thick folder on his mahogany desk. "Something I should have shown you weeks ago." Robert opened the folder and found himself staring at photographs, medical records, and legal documents that told a story he had never imagined. The first photograph showed two young black women in graduation caps and gowns, arms around each other, beaming with the joy of medical school commencement. One was clearly Rosa Washington, but the other took him a moment to recognize: Victoria Blackwood, 25 years younger, before she had straightened her hair and lightened her skin and buried her past beneath layers of professional success. "Rosa is my sister," Victoria said quietly. "Not by blood, but by choice. We met our first day of medical school at Wayne State, two black girls from Detroit who had clawed our way into a program that didn't want us there. We studied together, supported each other, promised we'd change the world together." Robert looked up from the documents, his mind reeling. "You're Dr. Victoria Washington from the medical records. You were Rosa's emergency contact before her marriage. I was her maid of honor when she married Marcus. I was Keisha's godmother when she was born. I was the one who was supposed to take care of them if anything ever happened." The next set of documents showed the timeline of Victoria's transformation from Dr. Victoria Washington to Victoria Blackwood. The name change, the career shift from medicine to education, the gradual severing of ties with her former life. It had begun shortly after Marcus Washington's death, when Rosa's world fell apart, and she began reaching out to her sister for help. "I was building my career at Westfield Academy," Victoria continued, her voice hollow with shame. "I had worked so hard to fit into their world, to prove I belonged among the elite families who could afford $60,000 a year in tuition. When Rosa called asking for help, asking me to take custody of Keisha while she recovered from her breakdown, I panicked. Robert studied the woman before him, seeing her clearly for the first time. The rigid posture, the perfect diction, the careful distance she maintained from any hint of her origins. It was all armor against a world that had taught her to be ashamed of where she came from. "You abandoned them," he said, not accusingly, but with the quiet recognition of someone who understood the weight of moral failure. "I told Rosa I couldn't take Keisha because it would compromise my professional position. I said that association with a family involved in litigation against a major corporation could damage my credibility with the Academy's board. I convinced myself I was protecting my ability to help other disadvantaged students in the long run." The truth was uglier and more human than Robert had expected. Victoria hadn't been a cartoon villain motivated by simple racism or class snobbery. She had been a woman terrified of losing everything she had worked to achieve, willing to sacrifice her sister's family to protect her own precarious position in a world that had never truly accepted her. "But that wasn't the worst part," Victoria continued. "The worst part was when Rosa stopped calling. When she and Keisha disappeared into homelessness and I didn't try to find them, I told myself they were probably fine, that Rosa was resourceful and would figure something out. I buried myself in work, convinced myself I was serving the greater good by maintaining my position at the Academy." Robert thought about his own moral failures, his own willingness to let lawyers handle complications while he focused on building his empire. "When did you realize they were living in their car?" "About 6 months ago. I saw Rosa at a soup kitchen downtown when I was there for a charity photo opportunity. She didn't see me, but I saw her, this brilliant woman who had once performed brain surgery, standing in line for free meals while her daughter held her hand and tried to keep her stable. The final documents in the folder showed Victoria's secret attempts at help. Anonymous donations to homeless shelters where Rosa and Keisha might find aid, payments to local schools to waive fees for displaced children, even hiring a private investigator to track their movements and ensure their safety from a distance. "I've been paying for Rosa's medical treatment all along," Victoria admitted. "Not through the hospital's charity program, but through a foundation I established under a false name. When she collapsed and needed surgery, I made sure she got the best cardiac specialists, the most advanced procedures. Your public gesture was generous, but it wasn't necessary for her immediate care." Robert leaned back in his chair, the pieces of a complex moral puzzle finally clicking into place. "You orchestrated the custody intervention at the hospital. You were trying to get Keisha placed with a foster family where you could monitor her care without revealing your connection. I thought if I could get her into the system, I could use my influence to ensure she was placed with an appropriate family, a family that could provide stability, educational opportunities, a chance at the life she deserved, without having to acknowledge your relationship to her." Victoria's composed facade finally cracked. "I was a coward, Robert. I am a coward. I chose my career over my family, my reputation over my integrity, my fear over my love. And the most horrible part is that in trying to protect Keisha from the consequences of my choices, I almost destroyed the one good thing that had happened to her in 3 years." Robert thought about Emma's friendship with Keisha, the transformation both girls had undergone through their unlikely connection. "She doesn't know who you are, does she? Rosa protected my secret even after I abandoned her. She told Keisha I had died in a car accident rather than explain why her godmother had disappeared when she needed her most." Victoria's voice broke completely now. "My sister covered for my cowardice even while she was losing her mind with grief and poverty." The revelation reframed everything Robert thought he understood about the situation. Victoria's hostility toward Keisha hadn't been motivated by prejudice or elitism. It had been the desperate self-protection of someone who couldn't bear to face the consequences of her own moral failure. Her attempt to separate Keisha from the Sterling family hadn't been about maintaining social boundaries. It had been about preventing a relationship that might expose her shameful abandonment of her own sister's child. "What do you want from me?" Robert asked. Victoria straightened her shoulders, finding some echo of her former authority. "I want to make it right. I want to reveal the truth to Rosa and Keisha, accept whatever consequences come from that revelation, and use whatever resources I have left to ensure they never suffer again because of my choices." Robert looked at this woman who had built her entire professional life on a foundation of buried guilt and recognized something of himself in her desperate need for redemption. "And your position at Westfield Academy?" "Will end the moment I tell this story publicly, but that's a price I should have been willing to pay years ago." Victoria met his eyes with something approaching peace. "Some debts can only be paid through truth, Robert, and some truths can only be honored through sacrifice." As Victoria left his office with plans to visit Rosa that afternoon, Robert realized that their shared journey toward redemption was just beginning. The truth about family connections, corporate negligence, and moral cowardice would have to be faced by all of them together. But for the first time since this began, Robert believed that truth might actually set them free. 1 year later, the same oak tree that had witnessed the beginning of an unlikely friendship now stood as a testament to the power of redemption. Its branches, fuller now with spring growth, cast dappled shadows over a scene that would have seemed impossible just 12 months earlier. Dr. Rosa Washington sat on a wooden bench beneath the tree, her medical textbooks spread beside her as she prepared for her return to practice. The depression that had consumed her for 3 years was finally lifting, aided by proper treatment, stable housing, and the gradual healing that comes from being surrounded by people who refuse to give up on you. Her hands, once trembling with medication side effects and malnutrition, were steady again as she reviewed surgical techniques she hadn't practiced since her world collapsed. Keisha and Emma worked together at a small table nearby, not as tutor and student anymore, but as partners in a mathematics enrichment program they had designed for Detroit's underserved schools. At 13 and 12, respectively, they had already published a paper on innovative teaching methods that had caught the attention of educators nationwide. More importantly, they had maintained the friendship that had saved them both. Emma from academic failure and emotional isolation, Keisha from despair and the kind of bitterness that could have consumed her brilliant mind. Robert Sterling watched them from his car, as he did most afternoons when his schedule allowed. The past year had cost him dearly in terms of business relationships and social standing. Several board members had resigned from Sterling Industries when he implemented comprehensive safety reforms and established a victim advocacy fund. His country club membership had been quietly revoked. Margaret had filed for divorce 6 months ago, unable to reconcile herself to their family's new direction and the social ostracism that came with Robert's very public acknowledgement of corporate responsibility. But he had gained something more valuable than anything he had lost. He had gained his daughter's respect, Keisha's forgiveness, and most importantly, his own ability to sleep peacefully at night. The man who had once measured success purely in financial terms now found meaning in watching 2 brilliant young women discover their potential while lifting up others around them. Victoria Blackwood approached the tree slowly, still uncertain of her welcome despite months of family therapy and gradual reconciliation. She had lost her position at Westfield Academy as expected, but had found work as a guidance counselor at Detroit's most challenging public high school. The salary was a fraction of what she had earned in Birmingham's elite circles, but the work felt honest in a way her previous career never had. "Aunt Vicky?" Keisha called out, using the name that still felt new and healing on both their tongues. The reconciliation between the sisters had been painful and slow, requiring Rosa to forgive betrayals that had nearly destroyed her family, and Victoria to accept forgiveness she wasn't sure she deserved. But they were family, and family meant showing up even when it was difficult, even when pride and shame made it easier to stay away. Rosa looked up from her medical textbooks and smiled at her sister. "How was your day at Jefferson High?" "Challenging," Victoria replied, settling onto the bench beside her. "I had a senior today who reminded me of someone I used to know. Brilliant mind, terrible circumstances, convinced the world had written her off. I spent 2 hours helping her fill out college applications she was sure she'd never qualify for." "Sounds familiar?" Rosa said with gentle teasing. "Did you tell her about your honorary niece who's already been accepted to MIT's early admission program?" Victoria looked at Keisha with pride that still amazed her. The girl who had been homeless and forgotten just a year ago was now being courted by the nation's top universities. But more than her academic achievements, Victoria was proud of Keisha's character. Her refusal to let success change her compassion, her dedication to helping other struggling students, her ability to forgive the adults who had failed her. "I told her that intelligence isn't limited by zip code," Victoria replied, "and that sometimes the people who seem to have the least to offer end up teaching us the most important lessons." Robert finally emerged from his car and walked toward the group that had become his chosen family. Emma ran to him with the mathematical proof she and Keisha had been working on, excited to share their latest breakthrough. As he examined their work, calculations that would challenge graduate students, Robert marveled at how much his understanding of wealth had changed. The Sterling family fortune was smaller now, reduced by legal settlements, safety improvements, and charitable giving that some financial advisors had called excessive. But Robert felt richer than he ever had when his only concern was accumulating more than he could spend. He had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in what you could buy, but in what you were willing to give up for the people you loved. "Dad, look at this," Emma said, pointing to a particularly elegant solution in their proof. Keisha figured out how to simplify the equation by thinking about it from her father's perspective. He was an engineer, so she approached it like a structural problem instead of a pure mathematics exercise. The mention of Marcus Washington no longer brought the sharp stab of guilt it once had. Robert had visited Marcus's grave several times over the past year, not seeking absolution, but acknowledging the debt he could never fully repay. He had established the Marcus Washington Foundation for Industrial Safety, endowing it with enough money to advocate for worker protection laws nationwide. It wouldn't bring Marcus back, but it might prevent other families from experiencing the Washington family's tragedy. As the afternoon sun began to sink lower in the sky, the small group gathered their belongings and prepared to head home, to the modest but comfortable house Robert had purchased for Rosa and Keisha, to the apartment Victoria rented in a neighborhood she was slowly learning to call home, to the quieter but more authentic life Robert and Emma were building together. "Same time tomorrow?" Keisha asked Emma as they packed up their mathematics materials. "Wouldn't miss it," Emma replied. "We still have that proof to finish, and Mrs. Johnson's students are expecting us on Thursday." As they walked toward their cars, Robert reflected on the year's journey from moral failure to redemption, from prejudice to understanding, from isolation to family. It had required him to give up almost everything he had once thought defined success: money, status, social acceptance, business relationships built on mutual exploitation rather than mutual respect. But in return, he had gained something invaluable: the knowledge that when faced with a choice between profit and principle, between reputation and redemption, between fear and love, he had finally chosen correctly. The oak tree would be there tomorrow, and the day after that, sheltering the continuing friendship between two remarkable young women who had taught an entire community about the transformative power of seeing past surface differences to recognize the fundamental humanity that connected them all. Under its branches, they had learned that family wasn't about blood or race or economic class. It was about the people who showed up, who cared enough to help, who refused to give up on each other even when the world said they didn't belong together. And that was a lesson worth more than any fortune Robert had ever imagined. Message for American seniors. 200 words. Friends, this story reminds us that it's never too late to choose love over fear, principle over profit. At our age, we've seen how quickly life can change. A medical crisis, job loss, family tragedy can strip away everything we thought defined us. But we've also learned that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or social status. It's measured in the relationships we nurture, the people we lift up, and the courage we show when faced with moral choices. Robert Sterling had everything money could buy, but he was spiritually bankrupt until a homeless child taught his daughter, and him, about genuine character. How many times have we dismissed someone because of their circumstances, their race, their address? How often have we chosen comfort over compassion? Rosa Washington was a neurosurgeon who lost everything, yet her daughter never lost hope or kindness. That's the American spirit we grew up believing in, the idea that character matters more than circumstances, that second chances are possible, and that family is defined by love, not blood. In our golden years, we have the wisdom and freedom to be the people we always hoped we could become. Questions for interaction. Have you ever had your assumptions about someone completely changed by getting to know their story? What's the most important lesson about character that you'd want to pass on to your grandchildren? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your stories matter and inspire others.